Good evening, everybody. Good evening. I think if you could be taking your seats, please. I just wanted to welcome you to the Methodist Church here and take one moment just to show you a picture that's up on the screen, which is that we're developing a community garden now up on one of the lawns. You'll see that it's underway. It's being filled up with soil at the moment, and we hope that in a few weeks' time people will start to plant things in it and use it as a community facility, particularly to come at more or less set times so that groups of people come and get to know each other and enjoy it. So if you want to know more about it, just do have a chat afterwards, and I hope it'll be very successful. I'll hand over to Mary.
There's so much going on now. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out on a wet, drizzly evening. And I've been really looking forward to this because it's going to be fascinating to hear some people I know very well and to see what they've been up to when they haven't been at a MHSG meeting here in London. So I think with no more ado, I'm going to introduce Stuart McElroy, who's our first speaker.
Okay, thank you for coming. Before we talk about rewilding, can everybody hear? Yeah. Well, I'd like to just explain what rewilding is, because there's probably different ideas. So rewilding is not about bringing back wolves. It's about allowing nature to have free hand, allowing natural processes, giving them free rein with the land. Okay, that's what rewilding is. It's about it's about natural processes. There's no end specification here. We're not defining what this has to look like. And rewilding, it addresses both the climate crisis in terms of carbon sequestration, etc., etc., the biodiversity crisis, which we hear a lot about now, in terms of we're losing species. And it actually provides more jobs, as we'll hear later. We have more jobs than farming. Most people go to the countryside and they're not for tourism. The biggest industry in the countryside is not farming. It's, in terms of jobs, is tourism. So 5 key enablers for rewilding, what you actually need to do that. Obviously, you need land. And the larger the piece of land, the better. Buying a piece of land, like if you have a little field and you buy a little bit in the middle and just leave it alone and you think, I'm going to rewild that, it's not going to work because it's not large enough, it's not connected to anything, and it probably doesn't have very many species there anyway. You need money, obviously, to buy the land. Today, that's what I call CapEx, like buying it, capital expenditure. There are various government grants now that if you have a large enough piece of land or if you collaborate with other people for land, there are government grants that can pay you for delivering societal goods. As I say, you need ruminants. Now, ruminants are animals that eat vegetation. And you actually need 4 types of ruminants on land, because animals eat vegetation in different ways. I never knew this until recently. Like horses, they like nibble. Cows use their tongues to tear grass. Pigs rootle, which is they stick their nose in the ground and eat stuff down there. And deer, they browse. So you actually need all of those types of animals to have the input it needs from ruminants. And you also need people, because rewilding is about working with people. Like, people are part of nature. It's not nature is over there and we're here. We're all part of nature, and nature exists with people. And you also, maybe very importantly, you now need what I call a supportive regulatory framework in which government, i.e. the taxpayer, ends up paying landowners for delivery of societal goods. An example, it's much cheaper to pay farmers to keep the water on the land than to build flood defences downstream. It's actually cheaper. So, but you need to pay the farmer to do that, or the landowner. And there's other societal goods. Scale is a critical input. You need a large piece of land to really deliver major benefits. And there's more information here. I've put on the top here various books I've read. I'm not going to talk about them, any of them at the moment, but feel free to have a look at them. Now I'm going to hand over to Layla. Oh.
Some of you may know it, but these were photographs that we took on a trip nearly 5 years ago. There were a few taken by Annabelle and Alex, and a couple from the net website. Charlie Burrell inherited 3,500 acres of clay farmland from his grandparents in 1987. His wife, Isabella Tree, wrote in her book of 2018, on the table there, of their decision to rewild their land after futile attempts to make farming pay. She tells how they sold their dairy herd in the year 2000 and, inspired by Dutch ecologist Frans Vera, began the process of wilding their land. The sources of income now include government grants, ecotourism, the sale of wild meat, and more. Inspired by the book, Bruce and I booked 2 nights in July 2019. Since then, a lot more has happened, including the introduction of beavers, extinct in the UK since the 18th century. Discarded in the spring. And this is the bell tent that we stayed in for 2 nights. It was extremely comfortable and spacious, and really very, you couldn't want for anything else. There's no electricity on site, so they gave us torches. And all you could hear was birdsong and the rustling of trees. This is the rewilding kitchen, which has been, they've been recycling old farm equipment, such as, you can see tractor stools and reels, cable reels. And the other alternative is to bring your own tent, and you can camp around the outside of this wildflower meadow. On one of our walks, we found a tree platform, and I could see across this field, which was probably once arable, the kind of scrub that was developing, and particularly you can see this is sallow. It's a kind of willow. It's a kind of willow. And in the distance you can see these young people on a field trip examining the wildlife. A view of a herd of fallow deer. And this is not my photo, but one of the red deer. I don't know, what time of year was that? Do you remember? Doesn't matter. These are the longhorn cattle which they introduced. They try and introduce species which go as far back as they can whilst being suitable for the area. They are a substitute for sorry. It's a substitute for the 17th century extinct auroch. This is the matriarch of a herd of the longhorn. It doesn't show so well here, but it's got beautiful markings in this reddish brown. Here is some. These are the Tamworth pigs, which. Sorry. Yes, I think Stuart's already said that they rootle in the ground, and they uncover all sorts of things, including seeds for birds, insects, and also seeds for growing on to be wild. The Exmoor ponies were introduced because they are the closest we can get to the really ancient breeds of pony. They're very stocky and strong, and they can cope with scrub. We booked ourselves on a safari, which was the purple emperor butterfly. They're the second largest butterfly in the UK, and I don't know whether you can see this, but they're feeding on the feces of one of the animals. They're a very unusual butterfly, and they eat no flower nectar. They feed on aphid dew and carcass, a true carnivore. I think the UK now has the largest colony of purple emperors in the UK. NEP has the largest. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong one. There are lots of old oak trees with very high canopies. And this year, this is 2019, they had not seen any purple emperors. It was very late in the season. And we managed to spot 2 pairs of males fighting in the tops of the trees for territory and eventually for females as well. Sorry? They're fighting males. The butterflies, yes. Sorry, I'm still talking about the purple empress. They're so unusual, really quite aggressive. And they'll fight for females as well. Storks have been introduced to NEP very successfully. When we were there, the eggs had not hatched, they were not good. But the following year, they did, and instead of just being visitors to the UK, they are now breeding. And I think there were 26 chicks last year. There's another ground view of them. Not my photo. On the last day, we thought, oh, we haven't seen that many animals, and we were going for our last walk, and suddenly, about 15 metres ahead, this red deer, not that one obviously, a red deer stepped out, looked at us and held our gaze for four seconds, which is a long time to be engaged in a wild animal like that. And it then, completely unperturbed, it just walked on. We were unable to take photographs, thank goodness, because we experienced it. And I went home, and the following week I started to recreate what we had seen by making this image in monoprint. So that sort of summed up for us what being at NEP is all about, and it got us here. Okay, that's my talk.
Oh. Right, see if I can. Oh, thank you. Sorry? Just getting started. Thank you very much. Okay. Layla's has mentioned her most inspiring moment, or their most inspiring moment on their trip. Ours was when we went for a dawn walk, guided of course, on Easter Sunday in 2022. The nightingales, cuckoos and whitethroats had only returned from Africa the previous week, and they're all singing like mad. It was quite amazing. So that was ours, our important one. It was Isabella Tree's very well-written book. It's a great read, just to read it, that first caught my interest in NEP. I was particularly intrigued by her mention of carbon sequestration, drawing down carbon from the atmosphere and storing it in vegetation and in the soil. I wondered how this worked on an estate that had very few trees, relatively speaking. I will get onto that in a moment, because first of all, of course, NEP is most famous for its biodiversity. The creatures shown here are examples of their most well-known successes. But we must not, of course, forget the less visible creatures, such as the 23 species of bung beetle that were found in a single cowpat on occasion. Layla has very helpfully said a lot about the purple emperor, so I don't need to go into that. But it has been particularly well known as a woodland butterfly. And of course, as she said, they do very... the males have very aggressive mating displays on the tops of oak trees. But the females lay their eggs on sallow scrub. That's the low-growing willows that Layla mentioned, are found on damp soil. So they need both those two different habitats. They need the woodland and they need the sallow scrub. I'm talking here about the major factor in success, which is the wild variety of habitats at NEP. Stuart mentioned that these are particularly created by the large herbivores which munch, tramp, rootle and nibble their way around. The nightingales were also thought specifically to be a woodland bird. But actually, they make their nests on the ground, underneath brambles and thorn scrub, because these act as protection from predators. So not woodland. They need two different habitats. They need the woodland and the brambles and the thorn scrub. Then there's the turtle dove. This was known to eat the seeds of annual flowers on arable fields. That is before these were routinely destroyed with herbicides. But what do the turtle doves eat in the spring when they're nesting? I think the jury is still out on that one. They haven't actually decided. Whatever it is, there's something at NEP that they really like. But if these varied habitats are good for biodiversity, are they good for the climate? The owners of NEP claim that they are. But how can this be when only 13% of woodland, there's only 13% of woodland on the estate? I don't know if you can see this very well, but the pale brown patches, there, and there, are all woodland. The pale orange patches are thorn scrub, and the rest are all different sorts of sallow. That's the blue, the purple, and the yellow. So there's very little woodland. There are large freestanding trees, particularly oak trees, and there are hedgerows, but it's not exactly woodland. That's, I imagine, sorts of grass. If we move on.
That's grassland.
Yes, that's a sort of typical view of NEP. So it's a mixture of grassland and different sorts of scrub, with these large trees occasionally. There will be more trees in the future, because there are saplings growing up amongst the thorn scrub and the brambles, which are protected by them from the roaming herbivores. But the landscape will remain very open as long as the herbivores are there. Trees are very visible carbon stores, easily identifiable for funding purposes and for carbon credits. Carbon in the soil is, on the other hand, invisible, but at least as important. There's as much carbon in the soil globally as in all vegetation on land and as well as the whole of the atmosphere combined. Even in forests, there's more carbon in the soil than in the trees. The massive rainforest trees, of course, contain more carbon than do any of the others. The pines and larches in the boreal forests just can't compete in size. So, vegetation. These are the This is the vegetation in the tropical forests, very much more obviously than in the others. The pines and larches in the boreal forests just can't compete in size. These are the forests just below the Arctic tundra, also known as the taiga. But if you take the carbon in the soil into consideration, then the boreal forests have more total stored carbon in both vegetation and soils than the tropical forests, even though the land area is slightly less. They have over 5 times as much carbon stored in the soil as in the trees, whereas in the tropical forests, the relative carbon stock of the two is equal. So in all, there's more carbon stored in the boreal forests than in the tropical forests because of the amount of carbon that's stored in the soil. Incidentally, the taiga, that's the boreal forests, was not forested at all before humans arrived on the scene. Huge herbivores such as mammoths and woolly rhinoceros maintained the vast area as grassland steppe. Hunting seems to have been a major factor in both the animals' extinction and the consequent growth of the forests. And in fact, large herbivores have been introduced recently in a patch of Siberia that are hoping to recreate this grassland steppe. In fact, that's been going since the 1990s, so I think they are being successful in it. So the storage of carbon in vegetation is easy to envisage, but storage in the soil is not so straightforward. So I thought, I don't know if everybody knows all this, but I thought I'd just say briefly something about that. The carbon gets into the soil mostly through the microscopic strands of fungi that weave themselves in and out of the plant roots in many branching networks, the mycorrhizae. The plant, of course, thanks to Alex from the diagrams here, the plant, of course, takes in carbon dioxide during photosynthesis for its own growth, but it also feeds some of this carbon to the fungi at its roots, these brown squiggly bits of the fungi, which use it for their growth. The fungi are basically made of this carbon, and they're mostly entirely dependent on the plants to supply it. And in return, the fungi bring essential nutrients, minerals, nitrogen and water to the plant from elsewhere in the soil in a form that the plant can use. But these fungi are both very fragile and are very short-lived. How does the carbon of which they are made get into the soil? Stay in the soil? Thank you. When the fungi die, they decompose into a sort of glue, which sticks to the minute mineral particles which form the basis for soil. Thus anchored in the soil, the carbon of which the fungi were made can then stay there for a very long time, potentially for many hundreds of years. Carbon also, of course, collects in the soil from decomposing vegetation, leaf litter, fallen branches, dead plants and trees. This process, of course, enriches the soil, but it's not as efficient a way of sequestering carbon as via the dead fungi. Because during the process of decomposition, carbon dioxide is emitted into the air. And of course, if the dead vegetation is set alight in forest fires, then even more carbon is lost. Relatively large particles remain in the soil after decomposition, and these are not anchored to soil particles, so do not last as long as the combination of dead fungi and minerals. I'm talking, of course, here of relatively dry soils, not peat soils. Deep digging will, of course, release carbon from the soil, and even digging to plant trees can be counterproductive. If planted in pasture, it can take 5 to 10 years for net carbon sequestration to occur, and for over 20 years for the soil to recover its carbon store. In the climate crisis, we don't have time to wait for this to happen. So let's return to the idea of browsed scrubland as a carbon sink, as opposed to woodland. There has been little or no research on this until recently, but a project has been started using NEP as a case study. Initial results show that browsed plants, such as by deer, that browsed plants and trees compensate for this rough treatment by developing their roots much more than trees do, and hence store more carbon in the soil than the otherwise would. So it's usually assumed, here's an ordinary tree on the left, and it's usually assumed by the experts that an unbrowsed tree will have most of its vegetation above the ground. So 4/5 of the vegetation would be above the ground and just 1/5 below it. But if you have an animal such as this one browsing the trees, there are usually equal amounts of vegetation above and below the ground. So there's more carbon stored in the ground with those. And of course, pruning, pollarding, coppicing by humans will have the same effects. So I'll just say briefly at the end something about NEP cattle and the well-known problems of methane production and the need for cattle feed. Well, the NEP cattle don't eat cattle feed since they stay outdoors all year feeding themselves. They don't overgraze the vegetation because they are controlled by culling to make sure that there aren't too many. But methane is, of course, belched out by cattle when they eat grass. But in a wilder environment, they also eat many other types of plants and the lower leaves of trees, using their horns to pull down branches. Some of these plants that they eat also inhibit the production of methane, even from any grass that is already in the stomach, such as this fallow that the cow is eating contains condensed tannins, and this inhibits the production of methane. Whoops, something's happened to the edge of the... the plant at the top is fumitory, and this, of course, is bird's foot trefoil, and angelica and shepherd's purse and rock cress. These are all plants that inhibit the production of methane. farmers are concerned about this because as the microbes that digest the grass in the cattle's stomachs, they reduce the energy and growth of the cattle. So the farmers are very concerned to stop this happening. And they're growing bird's foot trefoil as a crop in the US to put in cattle feed. But of course, in a natural setting, the cattle actually seek out these plants themselves. And the cows apparently teach their calves what to eat. All that bloating can't be comfortable, and maybe they're also aware of their energy being reduced when they eat a lot of grass. That's all I was going to say.
Stay where you are, please, Annabelle. Don't mind. You might stay where you are for the question time.
Oh, we're having question time now, are we? Okay.
Sorry, unless there's any more speakers. Is that right? Oh, he's speaking. Yeah, sorry, that was just the intro. Right. I thought that was uncharacteristic.
Otherwise you won't be on the camera. Yes, please. Thank you. Yep. That's good.
If you stay near the table, you don't need too far because it's very narrow. You can just put it in the... Yeah,
Thank you, Annabelle. I'm now going to talk about, myself and my wife, we've bought some land in Norfolk to rewild, so I'm going to talk about that for a few minutes. First of all, about my rewilding journey, and I think I was always a rewilder. I remember as a child thinking, growing up in rural Bedfordshire, thinking, wouldn't it be great to buy a big field and like recreate the American West? And then it's quite funny, you get to be an adult before you realise that why not recreate Britain? You know, we've had wild animals here in the past as well. You shouldn't have to go somewhere else to see wild animals. So a few years ago, I drew up a vision picture, which I'll show you in a few minutes. But then I am fortunate enough to have the opportunity to do this, to buy land. And my mum, she lived on Windermere Road here, and lucky enough to buy a house in 2008. And yeah, at the end of one recession. So when she died, and I have one brother, you inherit some money. So you have the opportunity to do something. So I had an inheritance, and I had support from my wife to actually do this, do what I really want to do, rather than put in a new kitchen or the other stuff that you could do with money. But I have the persistence to go and buy land. Like, it's not easy to buy a big piece of land in this country. I think most large landowners, they'll sell other assets, but they won't sell land. They like to keep hold of the land. And for me to get hold of this was luck, really, as well, managing to find somebody who had land to sell at the point where we wanted to buy. So I got in touch with Rewilding Britain, who are a charity, and said, look, I've got a sum of money, I'd like to buy a piece of land for rewilding. And you'd think a rewilding charity would bite your hand off at that point. But no, you don't hear anything. So I got in touch with them again, and you talk to somebody who then talks to somebody else, and I talked to this guy, Alistair Driver,
who has a really great job now. He, with Rewilding Britain, he travels the country advising large landowners on how to rewild their land. And he, when I got in touch with him the second time, he said, oh, I actually talked to somebody last week who needs to sell some land because they have a big bit of land and they bought another bit of land and they had to sell some land to pay off the bank loans. So I had money, he had land, and we got together. But I went up to have a look at the land, and you think, yeah, I'll decide if I buy it or not, but actually it wasn't my decision, it's his decision, it's the seller's market. You know, he's looking for somebody who buys into his vision of rewilding the land, what you're going to do with the land. So at the bottom I've just said that what drove me is, if not me, if I'm not going to do this, buy land for rewilding, who's going to do this? You know, I have money, why wouldn't I do it? And if I'm not going to do it now, when am I going to do it? You know, so if not me, who? If not now, when? Oh, and that's my mum, by the way. You probably worked that one out. Well, both pictures are my mum. The top one is my mum, yeah, which she was younger then. Yeah.
How old was she then?
28 or something, yeah. And the bottom one, is also my mum, where we scattered her ashes in the land that we bought with her inheritance up in Norfolk. So I drew a picture, this is a few years ago, thinking what would I like a piece of land to look like? And yeah, I said, well, I wanted at least 100 acres, I'd like a river on the side of it, I'd like to be able to drive there, and I'd like some trees, which we call wood pasture, a bit like Knepp. It's not closed canopy forest, it's not a meadow, it's a bit of both. And a bit of swamps and ponds and stuff in there. And actually I want the land to be bordering a project, a rewilding project or a national park. And with no fence, because by doing it that way, you get the benefit of the animals with none of the costs. They come into your land and they do their, you can do the various tongue movements. You know, I'm not going to do it now, but I'm not going to rootle like a pig either. But you get them all for free. The people who have the project, they pay all the costs of the animals, but we get the benefit of them. But you fence the bit of land where the farm is, the existing where you continue to farm. You've got a fence there, but we take down the fence between the national park or rewilding project and our land. And I wanted to put some tree houses in there as well. So that was the vision that I had. I think I drew this up in about 2018, 2019, something like that. And this is what we bought. 43 acres of arable land in North Norfolk, which is basically a really big field. We were going to buy the field, and then we bought the bit of woodland at the bottom as well. A ghost pond is, well, there's been ponds there in the past and they've filled them in, but you could put a pond back there. And this is Oliver Birkbeck, who he was the landowner of this field and a lot of other fields. And yeah, we thought it was fitting to go up in a tree, and I took him tree climbing and we agreed our deal. When I say our deal is, we've bought the land and we're going to work together, and you can't contractualize all of that. You know, it's basically a handshake. You know, we own the land, but are we going to work together? Is he going to decide to do something else in the future? You don't know, but I don't believe he would. And I think it's quite interesting when I've looked at this again with the field here, how close to my vision this ends up. Like here with this field, the road access comes in the bottom left-hand corner. There's a bit of woodland in the bottom right-hand corner where we're going to put a tree house. There's the other rewilded land is up here, other farmed land is there. So looking back at my vision picture, it's actually quite uncanny how the road in the bottom left-hand corner, the tree house in the bottom right-hand corner, the rewilded land, the farmed land, almost uncanny how what I drew as a picture has come to pass. Yeah. So we go forward. So we've bought some land, but how does this fit into the bigger picture? This is what is called the West Norfolk Nature Network, which is 18 plus 1 landowners. There were 18 landowners have got together to link up their land for rewilding. Now, not all of it will go into full rewilding, meaning with wild animals. A lot of it is what we call regenerative farming. So it will be farmed for wildlife, but you won't have wild animals running around there. No pesticides, no herbicides, wildflower margins, let the hedges billow out, that sort of thing. When I say 18 plus 1 landowners, there was 18 plus 1, which was myself and my wife. We now have Helen Finch, who's a member of this group, who's also bought, I'm not sure if she's completed, but buying a field next to ours in North Norfolk. But we also all have a common vision about how this is going to work, and there's the list of landowners. We have 20 hectares, others have 2,000 hectares. So we've got, 1% of what somebody else has got, but we're all still working together on this. So what is the land going to look like in the future here? So this is a 13,500 hectare project. That's 33,000 acres. Now that's a lot of land. For NEP is 1,400 hectares. The green bits in this map are the bits that we're going into full rewilding. That is almost 5,000 hectares, so it's 4 times as much as the whole of NEP. And you can see the connectivity where these look like thin little lines of green, but they're actually 100-metre wide wildlife corridors to link up all of this land. And along here, there's 2 river catchment areas. There's this one here and this one here, and these flow from east to west to King's Lynn's around here somewhere. So one of the things in the future is to rewild the river, make it meander, hopefully put beavers in there, dams, and you get paid for this. You get paid for flood mitigation. As I said earlier, it's cheaper to do that than build, big flood defences downstream in King's Lynn. But it probably looks a lot nicer as well. It's about 2 to 3 hours from N10, etc. So one of the things on this that we will have to do in the future is put in wildlife bridges across, because there's various roads, minor roads going through here. So we'll need to put in wildlife bridges to so animals can cross those roads. And my wife had a very good idea on this, actually, which I can talk about later. So that's our field there. You can see that thing there is our field there. So we've got that little field, which is a part of this big wildlife network here. And Helen owns that field, and there's another field here, if anybody's interested. Let's see. So,
And how much is the question?
how much is the field? Yeah, it's about £150,000. Yeah. And I'm not taking a commission there. Okay. So what have we bought into on the really macro level here? Sorry, I was just trying to We're part of West Norfolk Nature Network. The 18 plus 2 landowners are part of that. But in Norfolk, there's also these other groups of landowners who have got together for rewilding. Like there's North Norfolk, which is Wild Ken Hill, which is on Springwatch, you'll have seen that they're up there. Sandringham is somewhere around here, which is involved in another rewilding scheme. There's Breckland Farmers here. There's all these conglomerations of landowners getting together. So at the moment, we're part of one, we'll work together, then in the future, we'll work and link up with these other rewilding schemes, and soon this will be what I call business as usual across the country. Rewilding will become the norm. It will no longer be a project, it will be everywhere. And, okay, what have we bought? What does it look like now? So that's last summer where we looked at our field after they'd harvested the crop. And this is ex-arable land, so there's actually very limited biodiversity there, which is actually good for us because one of the income streams you get from the government is what they call biodiversity net gain. So if you start at a very low level, you're going to get a much bigger gain from that. This is not the same field. This is another, a margin of an arable field where they seed with a wildflower mix. Now these are not the wildflowers you buy from Sunshine Garden Centre. They've gone to lots of ancient meadows across the country and found, well, what are the seeds that you have there? And it's cost a lot to pull this together as a seed mix. And in year 1 or year 2, you get a lot of poppies. But after that, the poppies get crowded out or superseded by other plants, and you start to get into what we call scrub. Now, scrub, as my colleagues said earlier, is a very biodiverse habitat. You need scrub for ground nesting birds. It's actually a very, very biodiverse habitat. Interesting story with the poppy is that when they started to rewild up in North Norfolk there, local people liked the poppies. And then when they stopped getting the poppies, because the poppies get superseded, they weren't that happy at that point. Can we have the poppies all the time? No. But anyway, getting to scrub is very, very good. So what are the benefits of doing a large rewilding scheme? One is its scale. You need a critical mass to be viable. Like, I never really realised this, that when birds, they fly off to Africa for the summer and they come back, they don't fly over England thinking, oh, I wonder where I'll stay this year. They go back to the exact place where they were the year before. And if that bird dies, that place that had birds is probably not going to have birds anymore of a particular species, unless you do a reintroduction. And a reintroduction is very expensive. So you need large areas of land where you have enough birds of a particular species for that population to survive. Losing 30% of birds don't come back from Africa, and they might have a bad year. And the number of birds that you need is 90, apparently. And that I got that from this book, Rebirding. You need 90 birds. So we will have in this country, we'll have wildlife sites where you have 20 nightingales. And the term they use is they're functionally extinct. You have them, but it's just waiting for a bad year, and then you won't have them anymore. So you need a large piece of land where you can have 90 birds, basically, where it will be robust enough to survive. You know, with large, you get less edge versus core. And you need to get the full range of ruminants. You actually do need cattle, pigs, horses and deer. And you need the right balance. For example, one sow can dig up 20 hectares of field in a winter. So we have 20 hectares. That field that we had is just enough for one sow. Yeah. You need a big bit of land if you're going to have pigs as well. Otherwise, it all ends up looking like Battle of the Somme. With the studies, the large rewilding scheme, we're going to get the benefit of all these studies without incurring the costs. So you do a land management plan about what you're going to best do with the land. Your baseline carbon audit. How much carbon is there? And as Annabelle said, most of it's in the soil. You know, who's going to go out and measure that for you? You know, if you have to pay for it yourself, it's quite a lot of money. But you need that if you're going to sell carbon credits in the future. You need to prove that there's more carbon there now than there was in the past. There is carbon gain. You know, a baseline habitat map. All of this we will get as part of being part of a bigger group. And there's various government schemes now for to reward people for providing societal goods from land, like landscape recovery projects. These are longer-term, large-scale, bespoke projects to enhance the natural environment. The group that I'm involved with there, we have won one of these landscape recovery projects. We're currently in a 2-year development phase, followed by a 25-year implementation phase. So in the development phase, we come up with a plan, we agree what we're going to do, and we need to match fund it. And the government will put money into that. And all the admin is done in one chunk. I've not bought land to spend my time writing bid documents or putting in submissions to gain money from the government. Here, it's done at the total level and then divided out to the individual landowners. In fact, its benefits are disaggregated to the field level. So us having a field which is ex-arable, which is at a low level, is actually very good in terms of the amount of, when the money comes in, we would get a proportionately greater share because our field is at low level of biodiversity at the moment, for biodiversity net gain. So, societal benefits, I think I just mentioned this, captures carbon, as we talked about earlier. There's also fire and flood mitigation. The flood mitigation we talked about. Biodiversity recovery, rewilding provides that. And rewilding provides more jobs than farming. I think on NEP, they employ a lot more people now than they did when they were arable and dairy farm. So what will we do with our piece of land now we've got it and it's gone through land registry and all the legal stuff that you have to do? Well, I said take down the fences and make gaps in the hedges. Well, there are actually no fences there at the moment, but it sounds good. Yeah, you can understand. It is now. Yeah, we'll do that. I want to get involved with the overall, and this is West Norfolk Nature Network project, where I can dig ponds. I want to go and do my go to Digger World, where you can learn how to drive an excavator, and so I can dig ponds. I used to be a management consultant, so I can provide that sort of advice for a project like that. We'll do the baseline surveys. Well, I won't be doing the baseline surveys, but I can imagine getting really interested in what we find 1 year and what we find if we do the survey again a year later and a year later and see the gain there. We'll seed the land with a quality wildflower mix. I mentioned that earlier. We're going to build our tree house with a hot tub, in the tree house. And we'll let in the ruminants from year 2 or 3. You don't put the ruminants straight away, otherwise they'll eat everything. Let the seed, leave it for 2-3 years, and then let the ruminants in. And the ruminants, remember, they're going to be on the much larger piece of land. They're not just in our field. They might say, well, I don't actually like your field that much. I'm going to go somewhere else. I think in Knepp, when they rewilded, you read it in the book, didn't you? They were interested where the pigs decided to eat, didn't they? The pigs had the whole of Knepp to go and eat, and they actually preferred eating in the where the verges were, because the verges had not been sprayed in the past. There's actually something to eat there. They weren't interested in going into the field. Yeah. So that's us in the hot tub in Knepp. Yeah. That's what we're gonna spend the rest of my inheritance on, putting a hot tub. Yeah. So in the future, what are we going to do in the future here is, I mentioned earlier about connectivity, the wildlife bridges. And I think there's 2 wildlife bridges in Britain, 2. If you go to Holland, you'll see wildlife bridges, or other countries, but in this country we don't seem to do stuff like that. But we had the idea that, you can buy a metal bridge for about 30,000, which the military use in warfare, and we could just put up a bridge. And why don't we just put up a bridge, if we can get permission to do it? Remember, these are minor roads in the country. You're never going to get an Arctic down there, or a double-decker London bus. It's almost like, why don't we just do it? Get the permission and do the things. Acquire more land to fill in the gaps in our in the map that I was showing you earlier. There's 20 landowners there now, but there's also landowners there who have not joined. And you think, well, why would you not do this? This is going to be interesting. It's the right thing to do, and you'll probably make more money than you currently make farming. With the land here, 8% of the whole land is being taken out. I think about 35% of the land is being taken out of production, because the rest is going into regenerative farming. But that results in only an 8% reduction in production, because the land that's rewilded is the marginal land. You're not going to rewild the productive land, you rewild the marginal land. We're going to put more ponds in. Other animals, like I think we'll get beavers, because beavers are now allowed in this country, aren't they? They now realise, 1, beavers don't attack people, and beavers don't eat fish either. But it's only taken like 30 years, and there's a very good book by Derek Gow, who campaigned to bring back the beaver for years and years, and he finally got there. He wrote an article, I think, in the latest BBC Wildlife magazine about bringing back the wolf. So he's got a good record in managing to take an animal that you think we'll never get that and be able to bring it back in, and he's done that. So lynx, there is some ideas about having lynx back in this country to keep the deer in check. Because there's an epidemic of deer in Norfolk especially. We drove up there last weekend, and you see dead deer all over the place at the side of the road. Bison. You know, in this, you have bison, wild bison. Well, when I say wild, they're in a fenced enclosure in Kent, in Wilder Blean. It's the only place in this country. And because we're British, you can't walk amongst the bison. There's a fence, I think there's a 7-foot high mesh fence, and then 2 meters from that is an electric fence to protect people from the bison. In Holland, you can walk your dog in a park where there are bison. You know, and you think, well, how does that work? You know, are our bison just so much more aggressive? Yeah. We'll look at high quality carbon offsets. This would be an income stream in the future in terms of all companies to get to net zero are going to have to offset something because they're not going to get there otherwise. And offsetting through a rewilding project in the UK, which you can actually go and see and can be verified because we're working with universities who will do the soil carbon audit and be able to prove that, yeah, that's happened. It's not mythical. It's not like planting trees somewhere were the trees planted? Did they burn down? You don't know. This is very high quality carbon offsets. And it's uncertain what would happen, what will happen with our land in the future. We're letting nature take over, and we'll be surprised, prepared to be surprised. And I think I'll finish with a few words. I read Jeremy Gibb lent me a book about a rewilding Cumbrian hill farmer who, in his lifetime, he had seen the transition from having what would have been back before the age of chemicals, would have been an organic farm with his dad and his grandfather. Then they went through the chemical age where you get due to fertilizers, you get higher yields, but that doesn't last. And the price of food, what the price they're paid goes down and down, so it's still marginal. So he said in his book, he said, what will our descendants say of us years from now? How will we be judged? Will they stand in the dust of a scorched and hostile world, surrounded by the ruins of all that exists today, and think that we, who could have saved the earth, were thoughtless vandals, too selfish or too stupid to turn back? Will the future know us as the generation who pushed everything too far, on whose watch the world began to fall apart, who had so little courage and wisdom that we turned away from our responsibilities? Or will they lie in the cool green light of the oak trees we planted and be proud of us, the generation that pulled things back from the abyss, the generation that was brave enough to face up to our own flaws, big enough to overlook our differences and work together, and wise enough to see that life was about more than shop-bought things, a generation that rose above itself to build a better and more just world. Yeah, you could apply that to quite a lot, really, but that's how I see rewilding. Thank you.
For all of our speakers, from Stuart and Layla and Annabelle. For those that don't know me, probably most of you do, I'm Cara Jenkinson, Chair of MHSG. So, who's got the first question? Chris.
Do you want to come and sit at the table?
I see nobody's talked about sheep yet. It's one of the animals that we find around, and we haven't seen them in any of your projects. And I understand that sheep are pretty destructive, and they dig up a lot of tree roots And trees, of course, are terribly important. We need much more trees in order to hold the water and prevent flooding. And you also, Stuart, talk about new jobs. Well, one of the problems about sheep is there are too many of them. And if you go to Wales, for example, you find that the sheep are all over the place. And the sheep farmers are very fearful that if you try and prevent them farming sheep, they'll lose their jobs. So it'd be very interesting to know how they could be re-employed elsewhere. So are sheep bad, and what can we do about alternative work for sheep farmers?
Yeah, sheep are bad. I think they're not a native animal, are they? They come from the Middle East. Sheep farms only exist due to subsidies. Yeah, I think George Monbiot, he called them white maggots, and now he's persona non grata in Wales, isn't he? But I think if you're going to pay subsidies, you should pay subsidies for what is good for not just the farmer, it should be what is good for society as a whole. And sheep farming is not good for society as a whole. It's not good for flood alleviation, it's not good for carbon sequestration, it's not good for biodiversity. And what is the average, I think the average hill farm in Wales makes minus X thousand a year. They don't even make an awful lot of money out of this. But it's become a cultural thing, hasn't it? It's become this is our culture. But intensive sheep farming, how far back does that go? 100 years? Maybe 200 years? But it's really not the thing that we should do. You shouldn't, and it's in the Rebirding book where and I'm quoting rough figures here, 80% of Wales is farmed for sheep to serve the interests of less than 0.1% of the population, subsidised by the 99%. You know, that doesn't sound like a very good use of public money.
And they aren't really suited to our sort of landscape, I don't think. You know, the rolling hills and plains aren't the sort of rocky landscapes that sheep and goats are particularly good at, because their hooves cut into the ground and they break up the vegetation, and they nibble the grass so close to the ground that nothing can get through. And obviously, I mean, if there's loads of them, it has even more of an effect. But in NEP, they decided from the start they would not have sheep.
Layla, any comments from you at all?
No, I've got nothing to add to that.
Okay. Just as a follow-on question from what Chris is saying. So the jobs created, so there are more jobs. What sort of jobs are there in a rewilded countryside?
Well, there's ecotourism. There are so many. Oh, sorry. Ecotourism produces quite a lot for them. I mean, they do get government subsidies. They sell their wild meat. I'm sure you'll add to that.
Yeah, people go to the countryside not to see a farm, not to see they go to see animals. In anywhere, there's various examples they use. For example, the reintroduction of sea eagles on the Isle of Mull, and they've worked out how much money that brings into the Isle of Mull. People going there to see sea eagles. People do not go to the Isle of Mull to see sheep farms. This is bed and breakfasts, restaurants, that sort of thing as well.
Thank you. Next question.
Is NEP now self-sufficient?
In terms of money.
Is NEP self-sufficient, was the question.
Is it making a profit for the owners?
Oh, yeah.
From what I understand, their overall revenue is lower than when they were a farm, but their profit is higher. Because they only in 1 year, I think, they made money as a farm. Only in 1 year. You know, because you have massive costs. Yeah, massive costs. And they're at the mercy of the market for their crops. But now they don't make as much money, but they make a profit. But they also get grants from the government. There's grants for doing societal goods. But then all landowners get grants anyway. You know, I mean, yeah. It's viable. Yeah, it's viable. Yeah.
They had to decide what to do about this farm that was losing. They had to decide what to do about this farm that was losing money. They were not making profits. They had to either sell it or do something. There wasn't any other way to go, really.
Well, I think because farming is very, as you said, farming for most farmers isn't really viable. It's as you said, it's a way of life.
And it's particularly in the low weald where there's very heavy, wet clay soil that was very hard to win farming.
Thank you. Any other questions? Alex?
I was just interested to know what, Stuart, what your neighbours doing regenerative farming, what are they going to be? Can you say anything very much about what their techniques will be and what they're likely to be doing, and how it might affect people who are not doing farming but doing what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, they're phasing out artificial fertilisers, pesticides. The margins of the fields will be a lot wider. The idea is that you have populations of like good insects there that eat the bad insects. Well, the ones you don't want. They're not bad, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So you will do that. You have what they call agroforestry. Instead of having a big field, which is a monoculture, you have bands of different types of plants there. In the field, remember, the whole of the project's not going into rewilding, so there's a lot of regenerative farming there. It's rotating crops. I mean, a lot of this is going back to what people did before industrial fertilizers. They didn't plant the same crop in the same field year after year. We didn't do that. We rotated stuff. It's going back to do that.
As we do on allotments.
Anyone else? Can I ask one? Yeah. How can we rewild Muswell Hill?
Who wants to answer that?
Well, I think I'll say something, and then you guys think about what you're going to say. The point I made in my scale is critical here, that you can rewild your garden, but it's never going to be large enough, even if you connect up to all these other gardens. And we don't even talk to our next door neighbours, and we're end of terrace, so for us it's not possible really. But you can do stuff in Muswell Hill. I've been fortunate enough to have the ability to buy a piece of land elsewhere, and I think that's going to be very, very effective. But we can rewild our gardens, and there's plenty of stuff in the media about let your garden become more messy. It doesn't have to have a monoculture lawn or a plastic lawn. It could be messy and all those things, like have a log pile, have a pond, knock a hole in the fence, and don't worry about it, you know. Because in the city they find that a lot of brownfield sites are actually very good for nature. I mean, Pinkham Way, just down the road, is probably much more biodiverse than most of our parks and gardens. And it's just been left like that.
Yeah.
Yes, well, we've had a go at doing a little bit in our garden. We've got a pond, not with fish, allowing, you know, frogs and we've had wonderful damselflies and also tried to do some wildflower. Not entirely successful, but we're a lot less tidy than we were, and we are seeing a lot more birds and insects.
You're connected already, I think. Are you?
I am connected, am I? Okay. Well, my particular interest is in carbon sequestration, and I think you can do an awful lot within your garden if you're growing perennial plants, particularly both for vegetables as well as ordinary plants, because that will they will be connected with the fungal network underneath. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought now. To grow plants at different levels so that you can pack in a whole load more, because their roots are at different levels, then they won't compete so much. You can grow nitrogen fixing shrubs, not your clovers and things this high, but proper shrubs. And the fungal network will distribute the nitrogen from the roots of those shrubs to all the plants in your allotment or garden, or whatever. Sounds as if you can prune and coppice and do all that to all your shrubs, and that will encourage carbon sequestration as well. And of course, this is all about biodiversity as well. And the more varied your plants, the more complex the fungal network under the ground will be. And so all sorts of wild plants and edible plants and bushes and I mean that seems to me a really important thing to do. It used to be called forest gardening. It's not really forest gardening, but I think that sort of thing is a good thing to do.
Thank you. Yeah, so actually I'll just say your question, it's a question from Chris about how well the council is doing in terms of rewilding, and I actually just wanted to mention neighbouring council, Enfield Council, who've done a lot in terms of rewilding. Just north of the North Circular, there's a park there, Pym's Park, and they've done a whole lot throughout the borough, meandering rivers, uncovering them, planting wetlands in just ordinary parks. It's incredible what they've done, and it would be lovely seeing Haringey doing a little bit more of that. Yeah, they are doing some too? Okay, yeah. Any comments on that? What councils can do, are doing?
I agree. They could do more, but it will become the norm, I think. It will become the norm. I think
it's not a question. I'm just going to put in a good word for sheep here. In the 14th century, our economy ran on sheep. That's why the Lord Speaker in the House of Lords sits on a woolsack. But, okay, there are far too many sheep, I agree. But they are now, I can't remember where I saw it now, maybe it was on Countryfile. They are supporting knitwear industry, and we all need to wear more jumpers if we're going to stay warm indoors, and they are now using sheep's wool for housing insulation as well. So we do need some sheep.
Right, I'll take one more question so that we can all get a cup of tea, and then we can ask questions a bit informally, more informally.
You mentioned beavers, which Enfield has actually introduced. In the States, they are doing artificial beaver dams using coppiced willow. Is that something you would be able to do in your area?
I think legally the situation in this country is beavers are not supposed to be. You couldn't buy a beaver and then just release it into your garden and think, oh, you can live in my pond. You wouldn't be allowed to do that. You're supposed to have them in a fenced area here. So what the land we have, I think, at the moment, you'd have to fence the side of the river to have beavers there. However, I would expect that to change because there are free roaming beavers in this country, didn't they, in Scotland, who just miraculously turned up as if by magic. And there are beavers in Devon, in the River Otter, who seriously, who just turned up. You know, I think there must be some sort of undercurrent of sort of guerrilla rewilders in this country who they've reintroduced beavers, and at some point there will be a wolf here or a pack or something. You know, it will happen. It will happen at some point.
The point that I was trying to make is that in areas where they haven't got beavers,
yeah,
they are doing exactly the same work by building artificial beaver dams.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're usually using it by coppicing willow, so it's a win-win because you get the garden straight
yeah.
and then you get the wetlands, the other thing.
Well, it would be better to have actual beavers to do the work, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, we could have probably a long conversation about the merits of different encouragements for beavers. So, I just want to say, before we thank our speakers, I just wanted to say thank you very much to Mary. This is the last event that she is organising. Mary is leaving us at the end of the week. And for those of you that haven't met Lisa, Lisa is our new Mary, Administrator and Coordinator. Welcome to Lisa. And then a big round of applause for our speakers. Thank you. And tea and coffee out there, I think.